All right, so if we look at some of the albums like Please Please Me, 1963, Help and Rubber Soul, 1965, Yesterday and Today, 1966, Revolver, 1966, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967, the Beatles' White Album, Abbey Road in 69, Let It Be in 1970. If we look at sampling of music, when you listen to In My Life, there's another one of those George Martin moments where he suggests an idea and the Beatles are like, I don't know. And then there's an instrumental break and you're going to hear a piano keyboard type solo. And so when you're hearing that keyboard solo, it's like Baroque or maybe Bach-ish inspired. And check that out. That might be kind of fun. If you were to watch the YouTube video on Eleanor Rigby, it's about a real person. Paul McCartney he's inspired. He was helping out an elderly lady. She lived alone. He got to know her very well, and he'd go grocery shopping for her. Paul McCartney would sit in the kitchen listening to stories, and she passes away, and Paul's a little down, and writes a song about basically that whole thing about Paul's meets an older lady, Daisy Hawkins. Goes shopping, hangs, chats. They just have. He's basically just doing the shopping, which maybe she can't do for whatever needs, essentials, groceries, and whatnot. And they're hanging out, spending lots of time chatting and talking, just being good friends and good humans. And he writes the song, and so there's a lot of songs like that of just like one of the Beatles hanging out, and they're inspired by those chats or an event song. So the Beatles wrote event music. They wrote songs about real people. Obviously, it's the song's not called Daisy Hawkins. It's called Eleanor Rigby, but it's about a real person. Yellow Submarine. I would say on this one, yes, like listen to the music. I would chant like. I would say I think the music's fabulous, but on Yellow Submarine, without spoiling everything, I would say make sure that you watch the actual video story. Now, of course, it would be awesome to have you watch the full video, like watch the video, eyes glued to the screen while listening. But it can be just as powerful to listen only, and it can also be just as powerful to just watch that video and kind of see what you get out of the story. So this is an intriguing thing we can do with music sometimes. There's not a right or wrong way. So on Rubber Soul 1965, this is where they get away from the yeah, yeah, yeah songs. You get a very highly artistic album cover. And I always ask the question, I don't want to give you the answer, but what instrument do you hear in Norwegian Wood that sounds different or eerie? Or I'll just give it away, Norwegian Wood, sitar. George Harrison playing the sitar. And I've already told you in my life with George Martin and the instrumental break and the keyboard, Bach-ish or Baroque styled, inspired, excuse me. Socially relevant themes contained in the lyrics to Nowhere Man, and the big thing on Yesterday and Today, 1966, the cover art was a precursor to violent punk imagery. So take a look at that. If you get a chance to look at Revolver in 1966, this is around the same time that where John Lennon says, we're more popular than Jesus. And then when you look up all the articles in the news, it's like people were burning and banning everything Beatles for a time. And then people not forget, but people, forgive. And maybe some people did forget too. If you look over to Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, these songs were like really nostalgic songs. And when we use the word nostalgic, we don't want to use it as a stereotypical thing. Like we need to like understand like nostalgia for all of us connects to something. So what I mean is Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, they are real places that they're actually singing about. The thing about the Sgt. Pepper album, this is around 67, and John Lennon meets Yoko Ono at a gallery opening. The Beatles attend around this time a lecture by Maharishi, Mahesh, Yogi. He becomes a big influence on their spiritual lives. They are with the Yogi when Brian Epstein dies of a drug overdose, and the Beatles are, of course, devastated. And basically with Brian, the short story is like he just started getting depressed because the Beatles got so popular so quick. He's like, well, what do they need me for? Like he just started kind of overthinking, and he didn't know how much he was loved and appreciated, while the Beatles did tell him that. Brian just started kind of second guessing. So the Beatles were, they're out of town, trying to be enlightened, and they lose one of their best friends and their manager, And it was all just because Brian was, man, do they need me anymore? Like what am I doing here? Kind of thing. So it was Sgt Pepper was a critical and commercial smash hit. It's one of the first concept albums, but we can't forget about the Beach Boys and Pet Sounds and Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. These are two big ones, and I'll come back to these two albums in another lecture in American Music where I talk about concept albums. The Magical Mystery Tour, I Am the Walrus, that's a big one. The Beatles' White Album, you've heard me just mention them earlier, but now going through the details. With the White Album, basically, the cover is completely white. It's the title, it just says the Beatles, and it's got songs, like everybody writes a song, You got eclectic songs. It's all kinds of different songs in there. You take a look at Abbey Road, and it's like you got the continued musical excellence of, say, like Sgt Pepper. You got George Harrison and Here Comes the Sun. They have, I Want You, Come Together. Abbey Road, probably the biggest selling Beatles album at the time of its release. The Beatles' White Album, this is probably, in 2021, it was 19 million sold. I'd have to double check for, our current year, but that's a lot. Now, there's other stories like the death of Paul and the breakup of the Beatles. So in 1969, there was rumors of messages in Beatles songs like Strawberry Fields Forever, Revolution Number 9, Blackbird, I'm So Tired. It's like you play it backwards and there's like suspicion of McCartney's death. It was all, gossip and drama, hearsay, rumors, that kind of thing. Paul is, no, but Paul didn't die, Lennon and Ono also began to release music independently of the Beatles, like Give Peace a Chance, and under the name the Plastic Ono Band. Let It Be is actually the last album. So Let It Be, this is basically pieced together by Phil Spector from various tracks recorded by the band members, and there was just editing and remixing them so that we could actually get this finals Beatles album, Let It Be. Some other things of note would be when they traveled in 1968 to study with Maharishi, and they kind of became disillusioned after a little bit, and they were like, okay, well, we're out of here. We're not feeling it anymore. Lennon divorces his wife Cynthia in 1968. He marries Yoko Ono. Of course, the public is stunned, and there's a lot of hoopla over that. On December 8th, 1980, John Lennon is murdered by Mark David Chapman outside his New York apartment. And yeah, what a real bummer. That was you can do more digging on that, but we lose one of the great lyricists of all time, one of our greatest musicians, lyricist, by some guy that was just fascinated and took him out, right outside his apartment, and yeah, not happy times. We lost John too soon. There's a lot of anthology albums that have been released, say from like 1990s to the 2000s. And there's been some really significant commercial success. Beatlemania, it's simply this. Look, the appearance on that the Ed Sullivan Show. This is February 9th, 1964. It was the most watched television moment in history. Well, at least in those times anyway. And the band appeared on the show 3 times. The first time it was live. The second time also live, but it was broadcast from Miami, Florida. The third time was a recorded performance from their first New York visit. So the Beatles' appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show certainly qualify among the greatest moments in television history, and it does help to popularize Beatlemania in the United States of America. So what's up with the whole John, Paul McCartney duo thing that you see on YouTube or Apple Music or wherever you look at videos and music for anything to do with the Beatles? Well, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, they were the primary songwriters for the Beatles. And throughout the band's career, we're talking Ringo Starr, George Harrison, they did contribute songs to later albums, both Ringo and George. Lennon and McCartney really rank among the most prolific, talented, and successful songwriting teams of all time. The greatness of the songs that they wrote, inspired a near endless list of artists that have just gone on to record, versions after versions after versions, of their music. So basically, John and Paul just had a handshake deal. It didn't matter if John wrote the song or Paul wrote the song. Everything that they did, it always said, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, or Paul McCartney and John. It always had both of their names are attached to every single song. That's a pretty friendly, happy, awesome thing to do. So that's kind of why you're seeing that. It just all started out as a gentleman's handshake, and they stuck with that. Yay, awesome. I think that concludes the Beatles lecture. I really hope you enjoyed this. I'm Professor Ron. Enjoy your life. Enjoy the music. I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.